Hello guys, and welcome back to another layout update. So this layout update is going to be for the month of February and March. I'm actually filming this clip right now at the beginning of February. So this next layout update is going to be more of a progress video, so you'll actually be able to see the progress that takes place over the next couple of weeks anyway. I already have a few things to share with you since my last layout update, so let's go ahead and get started. So in my January layout update, I talked about the valance construction, and I think I was done the framework itself up to about here, somewhere in that area. So as you can see, I continued on, and I made it all the way around. And in the last layout update, I also talked about how this wall here was going to be a little more difficult just because of the angle of the roof. And I'll go ahead after I show you where I got up to, just how I did it. So you can see it's complete all the way around the room for the upper level, and it even goes beyond this wall right here, right to the other wall, which is where the pulp mill will eventually be. So we're here on the other side of the wall, and you can see the rest of the valance framework over top of the pulp mill at the far end there. And you can also see that I didn't continue the valance framework down the branch line. Now the reason being is we have the windows, which I can't really obstruct the view of. I don't want anything running in front of the windows. And two, just the way that I'm installing the lighting, I think that it's going to spread further than the layout itself, so it wouldn't look 100% right because the valance would be the same height as the upper level valance. So I decided not to go that route, and the lighting on this side is pretty good anyway, so I don't really need extra lighting. It just might look a little bit odd with the rest of the layout having a valance in this section not. I am, however, going to extend the backdrop blue like right up to the top of the windows there, just so it looks a little more fluent throughout the layout, because the backdrop on the upper level is blue as well. So I'll probably paint it up until that height, like I said, just to make things look a little more fluent. And now this next portion I'm going to have to do freehand just because the tripod won't be able to get a proper view of it. But this is how I ended up doing the framework for the opposite side of the room for the valance. Now, I was originally having a little bit of a difficulty coming up with ideas for this because the space between the angled roof and the backdrop wasn't quite big enough to fit a 1x4 in there, which would have required me to do a lot of cutting and a lot of angles, which I wasn't really looking forward to. So instead, what I did was I found the beams of the trusses in the roof, and they are spaced 2 feet from center. And once I was able to find one, I was pretty much able to locate them all without a problem. And then what I did was I took 1x4 and I made a little plate to screw into the stud, and then I got the correct measurement for the beam that goes down in order for it to sit at the proper height. And when I installed this piece and this piece were already screwed together, so I just had to screw it into the truss, and it sat there without an issue. And then I added a horizontal beam, which then sits at the proper distance out from the wall. And after doing all of these all the way to the far wall, it'll focus, I just ended up connecting them together with another piece of 1x4. And I'm actually surprised. I was a little bit skeptical that this was going to be sufficient enough to hold the weight of the hardboard, because it isn't really that light of material, but I'm pretty confident that I could easily hang off this without it collapsing. I think it might bend a little bit, but it definitely would be able to hold my weight, which is nice. But by no means am I going to attempt that, because I really don't want to redo my bench work if anything happens. So I'm pretty happy the way this turned out. There's a few areas where my measurements weren't quite right, so the 1x4s didn't meet up quite perfectly, but the hardboard or masonite material, it was going to sit an inch below the proper height anyway, which would give me room for the fluctuations in height of the framework, just in case there was any, which there turned out to be. So I'm pretty happy with the way this turned out. So the next step is to go ahead and install the hardboard, and then that will be pretty much finished. Stay tuned. So I apologize again, this next clip is going to be free-handed, but just some more progress. As you can see, I've got the drywall tape up on this backdrop section, and I'll show you the other side as well. I've also put the drywall tape up and in place on all the joints for my fascia board all the way around the layout, and again, just like the other side, which I'll show you quick. I'll give you a quick look in just a second here, but I did it a little bit differently this time around, and you can probably notice that there's no plaster there, and it's a little bit odd because it's supposed to be drywall tape. So when I originally put the drywall tape up around the layout to hide or conceal the joints between the hardboard, I found that a month or two later I was having to deal with them peeling, cracking, splitting apart, and it was just a complete mess. So this time around, I'm actually just gluing the tape right to the hardboard. Now the reason I'm doing that is because the hardboard material is actually too smooth for the plaster to grip, and my the plaster putty I'm using has a little bit lower of a glue percentage than other plaster brands, because it was probably a cheaper one that I picked up at the time. But so yeah, I'm actually just gluing the drywall tape to the board, and how I'm doing that is I'm putting a layer of glue down, putting the drywall tape over top of it, using a putty knife to really make sure that it lays flat on the board, and then I'm going over top of it again with another layer of glue to really seal it in there, which prevents me from getting my nails or any tools up underneath the drywall tape, which would cause it to peel again. So that has been the process all the way around the layout, and that is now complete. And actually just in this corner here, I had to kind of compensate in this corner. I originally, as you can see by the foam, I had a rounded backdrop corner. But at the time when I extended the backdrop piece, I didn't have a piece of masonite that was this wide that could curve around. So I just opted to square it right off, and to make it look a little more fluent, I just put a rounded piece of, I don't know what you would call that. It's for drywall purposes. It's just the back side, which is why you can see the aluminum piece. It's flashing, that's what it is. It's a rounded piece of flashing for drywall work. And I just glued that in place and then covered up the edges with more drywall tape. And now that's pretty solid in place. And next it will get plastered. Just real quick, here are some of the joints, like right here and right here, down there, and on the lower level we have that one there, and there's a few others around the layout that I had to redo because it split apart and came off the hardboard. So that's what caused me to glue the drywall tape this time around. We're just on the other side of the wall here on the grade. And same thing, the drywall tape is glued up onto the board, and then same with on the fascia here, all the way to the end. And next that will receive plaster, so it all blends in and looks like one solid piece. So just a quick progress update. As you can see, I have, I'm gonna say probably more than half now of the valance fascia installed, and the way I'm installing this is just using the nail gun down there, with some brad nails. And then I just have this portion to do, plus the other side of the wall. So stay tuned and there will be more progress shortly. So there's been a fairly long gap since the last clip was filmed. However, where I left off, I hadn't quite got the rest of the fascia board for the valance installed yet. And you can see it goes all the way to the end. Since then I have took the drywall mud and gone over the drywall tape and filled in any little holes created by the nail gun. And I've given it an initial sanding, and I've gone back since that first initial sanding and applied more putty where it was needed in order to fill cracks or any imperfections that may have been missed the first time around. Once I've done a final sanding of all of the drywall mud, I will then go ahead and start painting the areas that need to be painted. So I'll start off with the backdrop, painting it blue, going over that again. And after that, I may paint the valance and fascia, but before that I may also put something in here like papers or painter's paper, something like that, or even cardboard, just to block off the external light created by these skylights. Because if I don't, basically having lights installed underneath, the purpose of having those will be completely defeated if there's already light there. So go ahead and do that, and probably work on a few other projects along the way to keep myself entertained. Well, we're back on the tripod now. I apologize for any of you who have gotten any motion sickness from watching those last couple of clips. However, what you're looking at right now is one of the few areas where I had to go back and fill in the area with foam. Now, the reason I had to do that was because when I was installing fascia, as some of you may recall, I think I mentioned it in the last video, the fascia board wasn't able to bend the way or the curvature that I needed it to bend, so I had to extend the bench work a little bit. This section right here wasn't so much the fact that the fascia wouldn't bend, it was more just so I could get an extra little space in there for either another track or maybe even a service road when it comes to scenery. Just wanted to really make sure I had enough space, and also extending these little corner pieces right there will allow a nicer, more smoother flow of the switches rather than having the tracks curve off really sharply in order to fill the space that I need it to. So we'll go ahead and move further down the layout, and I'll just show you one other place that I had to do this. So I had to do it in this area too, trying to fit in pieces of foam with an already oddly angled foam pieces that have been cut previously. Can be a little bit difficult. It's a lot of trial and error until you get the piece to fit in there. This area was mainly extended so that I could get my yard tracks in there, otherwise they would be hanging off the layout, but it also made the fascia board flow a little smoother, whereas you can see what the fascia board would have originally looked like. It came in and up and around, so it would have looked a little bit less formal, I guess, less fluent throughout the layout. So it's nice to have nice straight section in there, and that allows me to fit more tracks. The next areas that I have to fill in with foam is this one here, and basically the exact same spot except on the other side is this corner right here. And that is an example of when the fascia board wouldn't bend to the curvature that I needed it to. So as you can see here, the original layout plan called for the fascia board to do a big S and which calls for some fairly tight radiuses, and the fascia board just wasn't willing to bend that way. It was just snapping right in half. So I brought the bench work out, and can't really complain that I had to do that, because in the end it gives me more room for scenery, which isn't such a bad thing. I also have heard that there are different techniques to get around that. You can wet the masonite hardboard type material, and it will allow it to bend a little easier without snapping, and then it will cure the way that it is screwed or nailed into your benchwork. So this is another project I've been working on, one that's kind of stalled out a little bit because I've been sidetracked by other jobs or tasks. But as you can see here, I've made a little bit of a workbench type area. And that's because in this room I don't really have a permanent work place to work on models, building structures, decoder installs, that sort of thing. So what I decided to do was put a workbench here, since I have quite a bit of room to work between the grade and where I'd be sitting. Originally, I thought of maybe putting a station scene in here so my passenger trains had somewhere to go. However, I don't think I'm going to do that anymore. I may still have a track come through the backdrop and a dead end on this section, but that will only be for rail cars or engines that need to be repaired or worked on in any way. And that track would actually be isolated at a certain point, so I could also use it as a bit of a test track. And yeah, basically this will serve as my main workstation. Although it's small, it's something. It's an area where I can store tools. Over here, the gap between the actual layout, like the benchwork itself, and the workstation is only, it's under a foot. So that'll just be a little storage place to put tools or new rolling stock, that sort of thing. You can also see I made a little cove for my toolbox, so that fits in there nicely, and there is also enough room where I can angle it out and pull it out of there if I need to get in that section or I need to roll it somewhere else. The reason I moved the toolbox is for another project that I'll go ahead and show you now. So we are at the end of the branch line, and as you can see, it's quite a mess, and that is because it is a work in progress still. As you can see, I started to extend the benchwork. Now, once this is finished, the track in this area here, as you can see, I've already had to rip it up, is going to be changed around. I don't know how much yet. I have to kind of come up with a new track plan in order to make things work. So the reason for this benchwork extension is because in an operating session, the branch line is now going to be technically quote unquote owned and operated by BNSF. So it'll be serviced by CN. There will be CN traffic that goes down it to this end here where there's industries. But the reason why there's going to be a track that dead ends here is because I will then later on in time build a module, small 3, maybe 4 track module, and that will be the Burlington Northern Yard. That'll just hold cars in an operating session so the BN trains have a place to originate and terminate. When I'm not in the middle of an operating session, the module will be taken down, the cars will be put into the main yard on the layout. So that's the plan right now. Still a work in progress, obviously, and there's also another reason for extending the bench work, and it's for the purpose of this gate. Originally, the gate swung closed and it lined up more or less perfectly with the edge of the layout. With the benchwork extension, I'm now going to be able to modify the gate the exact same way as I modify the other gates, and then it should more or less work flawlessly. I say that term loosely, but yeah, that's the plan. This area is going to receive quite a bit of attention over the next few weeks, and yeah, stay tuned. So another project that I've worked on is installing the on and off switch to power up or power off the layout. Now, I had really no idea on how to do this. I had an idea, but I wanted to make sure it was done right. So I actually had a good friend of mine who is currently working towards becoming an electrician come and help me with this project. We actually took the power from an outlet and on one of the available slots that were available and ran it through the wall and into these switches. There's one on this side and on the other side of the layout at the entrance. So I have two areas where I can turn the layout power on and off. Still a little bit of a work in progress because as you can see, the switch only powers on the Digitrack system. And as some of you know, the PM42s actually require their own external power source. So the PM42s are still getting power from the white power bar that is still just plugged into an outlet in the wall, which means that I have to then power on the power bar in order to fully turn on the layout. So basically from these switches, I now have to run a few plugs and mount them on the underside of the layout so that the switch will truly power on and power off the entire layout. So as you can see, the track power is off, however the PM42s still remain on. So that's another project that's still in the works, about 90% complete, just gotta install some outlets that are connected to those switches. The other good thing about having the power being drawn from an outlet is that this entire layout is now ran off of its own breaker. So if anything, if any major wiring needs to be done, I can just flip off the breaker and start working. So I also recently completed the fascia board for the upper level layout. That looks good now. And then I also kind of finished up this gate section, and I'll show you what I mean in just a minute. So what I mean when I say I more or less finished this gate section or added the finishing touch was I installed little pieces of fascia board just to give it a little more of a finished look, although this whole area still needs to be painted along with the fascia board itself. So I capped off the insulation foam with tiny pieces of hardboard, one piece right here, another piece here. I also did the same thing on the lower level. As you can see over here, stealth piece there, small little piece right here to block off the gap, and another couple small pieces, and also put a tiny little sliver in there to cover up a gap. And obviously there needs to be a little bit more work done. I need to sand down the tops, and then I need to go back and put plaster over top of it, sand it all down so it all looks like one piece. I also have to do the drywall plaster and tape on the corners here so that there's no gap there. So that'll be a fine, tedious process, and then once that's all done, hopefully the fascia and valance will be completed too, so that I can go ahead and paint over everything. So I can't remember if I showed this in the last layout update. However, in front of you, you can see some switches and an entire flat of rail joiners. Those will all come in handy for when I go to install the yard. These here are micro engineering, and these are the track ladder system for those of you who are familiar with it. It actually saves quite a lot of space, so I highly recommend it. And then this switch here is going to be used for the yard lead near the gates. If some of you may recall, the track coming up to the yard is curved, and in order for me to get the most distance or longest length of track in my yard, a curved turnout is going to be suitable to help save space, more or less. So I also picked up a box of cork. That'll come in handy for when I install the runaround track, the temporary runaround track on the upper level. That'll eventually turn into the station track. However, this cork here will not be used in the yard. Well, it might be in certain areas, but for the main storage tracks, it won't be, for the reason that it's just too expensive. It's cheaper to go to Home Depot and buy a roll of cork and just roll it out, glue it down in one piece. It's also less time consuming than having to put individual pieces of cork together and make sure they're all straight, so on and so forth. So that will be coming in handy in the very near future. I should almost start calling these layout updates purchase updates instead, because I seem to buy a lot of stuff and not get a lot of progress or make a lot of progress on the layout. So I'm going to go ahead now and show you a few things I picked up over the last month and a half. So this is the first of my most recent purchases. This is one of 2 locomotives that I actually purchased off a Facebook model railroad group. I don't usually do that, but it was a price that I really couldn't pass up for the 2 of them, and right now with the American dollar versus Canadian dollar, it is getting really expensive to bring brand new models into the hobby shop. It's costing ridiculous amounts of money. So I've been starting to lean towards the Facebook pages that are the buy and sell to get really good deals. This here is an Intermountain Burlington Northern Santa Fe ES44 DC. Now this, I believe, is an older run, because it does have tsunami, and I do notice that the trucks lack a little bit of detail as to what we are used to seeing now. However, that's not really a complaint. It's just an observation I've made. Still an excellent model, runs great, sounds great, and then of course, being that it was off a buy sell page on Facebook, it was used, so there is a little grab iron missing. No big deal, because that is easily replaceable. So pretty happy with it, especially for the price too. And I'll go ahead and show you the second locomotive. So the second locomotive out of the pair I purchased off Facebook is this Athearn Genesis Burlington Northern Santa Fe ES44 AC. It also has DCC and sound, and being that's an Athearn, it also has tsunami. Again, I can't complain. This one isn't missing any details. It runs, sounds great. Very pleased to own this model. The Athearn Genesis ES44 ACs, which I'm sure most of you are aware of, are very well done. They aren't excellent pullers, but they sure have a lot of detail on them. So another 2 locomotives that I picked up were these Rapido Prime Mover -8s, one in the BC Rail paint scheme and another in just CN Sergeant Stripe paint scheme. Now both these units are non-sound. Originally I ordered them non-sound because when they were originally announced, the idea behind the Prime Mover line was to make them budget friendly, which is excellent. However, in order to make them budget friendly, they had to compensate by adding less detail and putting a budget friendly decoder in it, I guess, which meant that there was going to be less functions and so on and so forth. As time progressed, their ideas changed. Now the decoders are just a standard ESU decoder with all the functions. However, I never upgraded my order to sound because these 2 units are going to be used as basically a starter project. So for the BC Rail, I have to add, I guess, modernize it. So I have to add a yellow stripe similar to the CN, and I also have to install a second pair of ditch lights and some various other details on both models. So those will be a good project, good first detailing and sound installation project, even though the ESU decoders aren't hard to install because they have an ESU motherboard already in there, which means that I just have to basically put a 21 pin decoder from ESU inside the Locomotive shell and add speakers and wire it all up and so on and so forth. So moving on to the next set of purchases. Now moving on to the rolling stock that I've recently purchased. In front of you is this recent release from Scale Trains. This is from the rivet counter line, so very well detailed and prototypical. This is a Gunnarsson covered hopper, and it is lettered for the Arkansas and Oklahoma Railroad. The AOK reporting mark I see quite frequently on CN, so I picked up 3 of these hoppers, and they're a nice addition to the collection. So I also picked up these 2 Athearn ready to roll 60-foot Gunnarsson boxcars. I actually got 2 of each paint scheme, so I got 2 GACX and 2 AOK. I see both of these reporting marks quite frequently on CN, so again, I got them for that reason. And also the 60-foot Gunnarsson boxcars are very popular among all railroads, and they are very frequently seen and used. So working on increasing the number of those I have on my layout, since that's pretty much the main boxcar that the railroads use, or at least CN uses. So for the sake of saving myself some time in filming this layout update, I'm not going to take these ones out of the box because they just take too long to take out and set up and then put back in, because they aren't going to be left out while I'm working on the layout. So these are a 5 set of Maxi 1 well cars. This is the new logo. So if you can see through the glare there, it's the red TTX logo. And behind it is another Maxi 1 well car set with the older style TTX logo. Kind of hard to see there, I know, I apologize, but just a little bit lazy and wanting to take these out. So yeah, these are very nice cars. I have had them out of the box already, and they look very, very good when comparing them to the last ready to roll series of Gunnarsson's, or not Gunnarsson's, well cars, sorry, which have quite a bit less detail on them. So pretty pleased with those. I think I have another like 2 sets of Maxi 3 well cars coming soon. So once those are in, pretty much the well car or intermodal fleet will be more or less complete. Because there's not going to be a ton of intermodal traffic on the layout, but there's going to be enough to service the intermodal yard. Well guys, that pretty much concludes this layout update. Not much of anything super exciting. I pretty much have completed the valance construction, and that was a pretty major project, so I'm happy that that's out of the way. And then I just did a bunch of other smaller projects to help with the completion of the layout, so I can start moving on to scenery. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed, and I'm going to try and get more of these layout updates out a little more frequently now that school is drawing to a close here. So with that being said, thanks again for watching, guys. And if you have any comments, questions, concerns, feel free to comment in the comment section below, and I will get back to you when I can. Until then, we'll see you next time.